Good morning, friends and faithful listeners. This is Jen with the Bible Explained podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the second half of 2 Kings 18. Such a fascinating portion of scripture we're going to delve into today. But before we begin, feel free to pause the podcast and grab yourself a delicious cup of coffee or a cup of tea for you crazy tea drinkers out there. And also your Bible in the version that you prefer. But once you're done grabbing those things, let's go ahead and read 2 Kings 18, 17 through 37. As per usual, I'll be reading from the WEB. The king of Assyria sent Tartan, Rabsaris, and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great army to Jerusalem. They went up and came to Jerusalem. When they had come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. When they had called to the king, Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, came out to them. Rabshakeh said to them, "Say now to Hezekiah, the great king, the king of Assyria says, what confidence is this in which you trust? You say, but they are vain words. There is counsel and strength for war. Now on whom do you trust that you have rebelled against me? Now behold, you trust in the staff of this bruised reed, even in Egypt. If a man leans on it, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all who trust on him. But if you tell me, we trust in Yahweh our God, isn't that he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and has said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now therefore, please give pledges to my master, king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses if you are able on your part to set riders on them. How then can you turn away and face one of the captains of the least of my master's servants, and put your trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Have I now come up without Yahweh against this place to destroy it? Yahweh said to me, go up against the land and destroy it. Then Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, Shebna, and Joah said to Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it. Don't speak with us in the Jews' language, for in the hearing of the people who are on the wall. But Rabshakeh said to them, has my master sent me to your master and to you to speak these words? Hasn't he sent me to the men who sit on the wall, to eat their own dung, and to drink their own urine with you? Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, and spoke, saying, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. The king says, don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of his hand. Don't let Hezekiah make you trust in Yahweh, saying, Yahweh will surely deliver us, and this city shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Don't listen to Hezekiah, for the king of Assyria says, make your peace with me, and come out to me, and every one of you eat from his own vine, and every one from his own fig tree, and every one drink water from his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land just like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, that you may live and not die. Don't listen to Hezekiah when he persuades you, saying, Yahweh will deliver us. Has any of the gods of the other nations ever delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim and Hena and Eva? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who are they among all the gods of the countries that have delivered their country out of my hand, that Yahweh should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? But the people stayed quiet and answered him not a word, for the king's commandment was, don't answer him. Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, came with Shebna the scribe and Joah the son of Asaph, the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes torn, and told him Rabshakeh's words. Okay, so on Wednesday we talked about King Hezekiah, who took the place of king after his father Ahaz died. Ahaz was one of the worst kings of Judah that ever happened. He introduced a lot of idol worship into Judah. But Hezekiah was the complete opposite of his father. He actually destroyed everything that his father put up, all of the altars and the items of worship and the idols. And Hezekiah even got rid of the high places. He was the first king to do that, I'm pretty sure. All of the other kings allowed the high places to continue, but Hezekiah destroyed all of them and told the people, all of you must worship Yahweh the way he commanded you to at his temple. And Hezekiah also defeated the Philistines and for a long time pushed back the king of Assyria and did not submit to him. But now, after 14 years of King Hezekiah's reign, the new king of Assyria, who is Sennacherib, who happened to be the grandson of Tiglath-Pileser III, one of the most famous kings of Assyria, decided to go up against Judah and try to take all of its cities, including Jerusalem. And Sennacherib was pretty successful. He went up against all of the fortified cities of Judah and actually took them, except for Jerusalem. That was the last holdout. This obviously made Hezekiah terrified because all of his cities in Judah are being taken. So Hezekiah sent a note to Sennacherib, who happened to be in Lachish at the time, which was a fortified city in Judah. And Hezekiah said, "Please stop. We have offended you. We will do whatever you say. We will give you whatever you want. Just go back home." And Sennacherib answers Hezekiah. He's like, "Okay, you know what? I will go back home if you give me this amount of gold and this amount of silver." Hezekiah agrees and strips Yahweh's temple bare, took all of the silver and the gold out of it, and also took all of his own silver and gave it to the king of Assyria, hoping that Assyria would just leave. But the king of Assyria did not just leave. Instead, he saw Hezekiah's willingness to pay him as a sign of weakness. And he decided, you know what? I can go up against Jerusalem. This is my opportunity. So he takes all of Hezekiah's money and all of the money out of the temple of God, and he sends his Rabshakeh to Jerusalem with a huge army. Now, Rabshakeh, that is a title, not a name. A Rabshakeh, I believe, was an Assyrian word that meant general or commander of some sort. So the Rabshakeh goes up against Jerusalem with this huge army. And there were people on the walls, because Jerusalem was also a fortified city that had these very tall walls, and people could go up and stand on them to see what was going on. So there was a bunch of people just chilling on the wall, looking at the Assyrian army, and obviously they're probably terrified. And Hezekiah himself was probably terrified. So he sends 3 of his good advisors to go and talk to the Rabshakeh. And the Rabshakeh was so brazen that it says that he actually came up in verse 17 and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. So this conduit was where Jerusalem would get all of their drinking water from. And this Rabshakeh is so brazen that he stands in front of it, signaling to all of the people watching him on the top of the walls that he can cut off their water supply at any point in time. So he was trying to terrify all of Jerusalem as best as he possibly could. And while this is taking place, it says that the 3 advisors of King Hezekiah came out to him and talked to him. Now, these 3 advisors were named Eliakim, Shebna, and also Joah. And these 3 men could apparently speak the Syrian language, which was possibly also why the king sent these 3 men. But the Rabshakeh speaks to these men in Hebrew, which was the language of the Jews. And he did this purposely. And apparently the Rabshakeh understood Hebrew enough, was fluent enough in it that he could speak it quite well. So in verse 19, it says, Rabshakeh said to them, "Say now to Hezekiah, the great king, the king of Assyria says, what confidence is this in which you trust? You say, but they are vain words. There is counsel and strength for war. Now in whom do you trust that you have rebelled against me?" So the king of Assyria decided that Hezekiah had rebelled against him, even though the king of Assyria had not won Judah yet. So that actually shows how arrogant Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, really was. But Hezekiah, it mentions in 2 Chronicles 32, took courage, even though the king of Assyria had come up against Jerusalem. Here's what it says, 2 Chronicles 32, 5-8. Hezekiah took courage and built up all the wall that was broken down and raised it up to the towers with all the other wall outside, and strengthened Millo in David's city, and made weapons and shields in abundance. He set captains of war over the people, gathered them together to him in the wide place at the gate of the city, and spoke encouragingly to them, saying, "Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or dismayed because of the king of Assyria, nor for all the multitude who is with him. For there is a greater one with us than with him. An arm of flesh is with him, but Yahweh our God is with us to help us and to fight our battles." The people rested themselves on the words of Hezekiah, the king of Judah. So Hezekiah still maintained his faith in Yahweh in spite of the king of Syria coming up and trying to bully him. And you might be like, well, then why did Hezekiah pay the king of Assyria to begin with if he still maintained faith in Yahweh? And like I said on Wednesday, I think it was because Hezekiah had a moment of weakness, a moment of fear, where he thought that that would be the best possible way to act in the face of the king of Assyria. But then, of course, it did not work for him. So after it did not work, Hezekiah maintained his strength and his faith in Yahweh and even built up all of Jerusalem while they were trying to camp against it, which is why the king decided that Hezekiah was rebelling against him. So the Rabshakeh continues. "Behold, who do you trust in? Do you trust in the staff of this bruised reed, even in Egypt? If a man leans on it, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all who trust on him." Now, what's really interesting about this is that there is some biblical evidence that Hezekiah had tried to ally with Egypt in his fear. Though it doesn't specifically say that in the Kings or I believe in the Chronicles either, I'm pretty sure Hezekiah was considering an allyship with Egypt. But the prophet Isaiah, who was alive at this time, writing down all of his prophecies, was extremely against Judah partnering with Egypt. Here's what he says in Isaiah 30:1-5. "Woe to the rebellious children, says Yahweh, who take counsel, not from me, but who make an alliance, but not with my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, who set out to go down to Egypt without asking for my advice, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and who take refuge in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore the strength of Pharaoh will be your shame, and the refuge in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. For their princes are at Zon, and their ambassadors have come to Hanes. They shall be ashamed because of the people that can't profit them. They are not a help, nor a profit, but a shame, and also a reproach." And then Isaiah 31, the next chapter, verses 1-3, says, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, and rely on horses, and trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong. But they don't look to the Holy One of Israel, and they don't seek Yahweh. Yet he is also wise, and will bring disaster, and will not cut back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, and against the help of those who work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses flesh, and not spirit. When Yahweh stretches out his hand, both he who helps shall stumble, and he who is helped shall fall, and they shall be consumed together." So yes, Isaiah was very against Israel and Judah trying to partner with Egypt for anything. And unfortunately, it looks like Hezekiah considered, or possibly did, try to partner with Egypt in his moment of weakness. And the Rabshakeh, who is standing there at the wall of Jerusalem, yelling up, has more sense than Israel and Judah even did, because he's like, whom do you trust? Do you trust in this bruised reed, Egypt? If you try to lean on Egypt, this bruised reed is going to go into your hand and pierce it. So it is with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and all who trust on him. So it's funny that the Rabshakeh, who was not a believer in Yahweh by any stretch of the imagination, understood more about Egypt than unfortunately Judah and Israel did, who were supposed to be God's people. But then the Rabshakeh continues in 2 Kings 18, verse 22. He says, okay, if you're not trusting in Egypt, who do you trust in? If you tell me we trust in Yahweh our God, isn't that he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away and has said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? So the Rabshakeh heard about Hezekiah destroying all the high places. and mistakenly believed that those high places were places of worship to Yahweh. So the Rabshakeh is like, well, Hezekiah destroyed all of God's altars, that were all over Judah. So of course he's really angry because Hezekiah said that you need to worship at just one altar. So Yahweh is angry with you guys. So you can't rely on Yahweh because he's infuriated and he is going to be on my side. That's what he says next. In verse 25, he says, have I now come up without Yahweh against this place to destroy it? Yahweh said to me, go up against the land and destroy it. So the Rabshakeh is like, yeah, God told us that we're supposed to destroy you, because he's mad at you guys because Hezekiah destroyed all of his altars. So of course the Rabshakeh is just lying, just trying to make everybody who hears him terrified because he wants to take Jerusalem for himself. And he knows that Jerusalem is going to be a tough battle because Jerusalem was a very strong, very fortified city. And as we saw, Hezekiah built it up even stronger during this time and made a whole bunch of shields and a whole bunch of weaponry for the people of Jerusalem to go up against the king of Assyria. So the Rabshakeh wanted the people to be afraid so that they would just give themselves up, just wave the white flag and allow Assyria to just come right in so that they didn't have to have this big battle on their hands. And Hezekiah's 3 advisors sense that this is what the Rabshakeh is doing. So they're like, please stop speaking in Hebrew because, all the people on the wall can hear you. And so just speak in Syrian because we are fluent in Syrian. We understand you. And this isn't for everybody to hear. This is just for the king to hear. And the Rabshakeh gets super mad. He's like, excuse me, who are you to tell me what to do? My master sent me to your master and to you to speak these words. Hasn't he sent me to the men who sit on the wall to tell them to eat their own dung and drink their own urine along with you? Now, of course, this is referring to the siege that the king of Assyria was about to do on Jerusalem. And if you guys aren't sure, sieges would often last for years, okay? This would be when an army would go up against a city that was too fortified so they couldn't get into it. What they would do is they would siege it, and then no food, water, or anything could get into that city. And then the people at that point would become so hungry and so stricken with disease that they would surrender themselves. And then everybody would come out of the city. Then the army would go in and take it for themselves. So the Rabshakeh is referring to the siege he's about to do. He's like, you guys soon are going to be so hungry when we siege your city that you're going to eat your own poop and drink your own urine. And I came to tell you that. I came to tell you that's exactly what is going to happen to your city if you do not give up right now. So then the Rabshakeh stood there and cried with a loud voice in the Hebrew language and spoke to the men on the wall, saying, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria says, don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of my hand. Don't let Hezekiah make you trust in Yahweh, saying, Yahweh will surely deliver us, and this city shall not be given into the hand of the king of Syria. Don't listen to Hezekiah. The Rabshakeh is doing everything he can to terrify the men on that wall. And the reason he's doing this, the reason he's trying to terrify the men, is because he understands that the people themselves have power. Not just that the king has power, but the people themselves also have power. If the people are terrified enough, they can potentially force the king to do what they want. They can force the king to open up the gates of the city and surrender to Assyria. And that is what the Rabshakeh's goal is. And so he continues, he says, make your peace with the king of Assyria and come out, and every one of you will eat from his own vine and eat from his own fig tree and drink from his own cistern until the king of Assyria comes and takes you away to a land just like your own, a land that is filled with grain and new wine and bread and vineyards and olive trees and honey. And you will live there and not die. So the Rabshakeh is trying to sweeten the deal a little bit. He's like, look, if you just surrender to me, all we're going to do is rip you from your homeland and put you in one that's just as good somewhere else. You know, it's going to be a land with lots of vineyards and lots of food and lots of good things for you guys, just like right here. That's all you have to do is just surrender, and we'll just, kick you out of your home that you've lived in forever and put you somewhere else, but it's going to be just as good, I promise. And then the Rabshakeh continues and repeats, don't let your king Hezekiah persuade you, saying Yahweh will deliver us. Has any of the gods of the other nations ever delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim and Hena and Eva? Where are the gods of Samaria? Have they delivered Samaria out of the hand of the king of Assyria? And man, that's a low blow right there, because Samaria, obviously, which was the capital city of Israel, was supposed to worship Yahweh. But Samaria fell so far that even this Rabshakeh didn't know that Samaria was supposed to have worshipped Yahweh and didn't even consider Yahweh as the main god of Samaria. But the Rabshakeh's entire point here is that Yahweh is not more powerful than any of these other gods, because the king of Assyria had gone into these other lands with all of these other gods and destroyed everything. None of these gods had actually come to help his people. And in some way, the king of Assyria had more sense about false idols than most people at this time period did. The king of Assyria, I think, understood that these idols were actually false, that these gods were fake and just made up, because the king of Syria was successful, was able to go into these countries and completely destroy them, in spite of the fact that these peoples were crying out and praying to their gods for deliverance. But the problem here was that the king of Syria and his Rabshakeh did not believe that Yahweh was any different from any of these other gods. And if anything offends Yahweh, it is this. This offends Yahweh, I think, more than anything, to be compared to other little g gods. Because Yahweh is the real God. He is the true God. And so, of course, he's going to show his power and prove that he is the real God. And this is where the Rabshakeh and the king of Assyria made their mistake, was comparing God to all of these other little idols around the world. And then the Rabshakeh ends his speech by saying, who is Yahweh that he should deliver Jerusalem out of the king of Assyria's hand? Those are some fighting words. Apparently, according to 2 Chronicles also, this was not the end of the king of Assyria making fun of Yahweh. Apparently, the king of Assyria also sent a whole bunch of letters insulting Yahweh, which is mentioned in 2 Chronicles 32, verse 16 through 19. It says, the king's servants spoke yet more against Yahweh and against his servant Hezekiah. He wrote letters insulting Yahweh, the God of Israel, and speaking against him, saying, as the gods of the nations of the lands, which have not delivered their people out of my hand, so shall the God of Hezekiah not deliver his people out of my hand. They called out with a loud voice in the Jews' language to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall to frighten them and to trouble them, that they might take the city. They spoke of the God of Jerusalem as the gods of the peoples of the earth, which are at the work of men's hands. Now, of course, all of this was meant to intimidate and terrify these men who were listening to this speech and reading these letters. But thankfully, it did not work the way the king of Assyria thought it would. In verse 36, going back to 2 Kings 18, it says, the people stayed quiet who were listening on the walls and answered the Rabshakeh not a word, for the king's commandment was, don't answer him. Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, came with Shebna the scribe and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder to Hezekiah with their clothes torn, and they told him the Rabshakeh's words. So obviously there was a lot of fear. These three men who were listening to all of this came back to the king with their clothes torn. That was a sign of mourning and deep distress. I'm sure the men on the walls also tore their clothes or were in deep distress or fear. But instead of becoming fearful and giving in to the king of Assyria, King Hezekiah does something else entirely. And we're going to talk about that in the next chapter. Maybe you can see now why I think that this chapter is such a fascinating and interesting chapter, just so filled with history and just such an interesting story about some of the wars that took place at this time period. But of course, we'll talk about how Hezekiah responds to this on Wednesday, and then tomorrow we're going to be in the book of Ephesians, which Ephesians has been fascinating as well because it talks about a lot of really difficult concepts. So I hope you tune in to tomorrow's episode, 6 a.m. or whenever you choose to wake up and listen. But faithful listeners, don't forget to check out the shop if you would like to support this ministry or the Bible Explained podcast. Get yourself a crazy t-shirt. Those are now available. And also the Lion of Judah tee, the updated version, is available, and it looks so much better, I think, than the old style. But the old style Lion of Judah tee, I still have a few in stock, and they are on sale. So if you'd like to grab the old style, go to the shop and check them out before they're gone. But faithful listeners, have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy listening, and God bless.